Let's go ahead and end with an example or demo of how we can use functions to streamline a program. And in this example, we're given some initial code. So notice we are given declarations for each of these functions with our preconditions and postconditions. So we know that getDataFiles will basically update the input and output file names back in main. We have a function called calcLetterGrade that will take a homework, midterm, and final score and give us a character letter grade corresponding to the percentage of total points and the letter grade earned. And then we also have a function called processGradeFile, and this function will take the name of an input file and the name of an output file. And that processGradeFile function will read data from an input file like this one and we see we have the last name of a student and a homework, midterm, and final score. So for each student, we will read homework, midterm, and final scores, and in the output file, we will output the student's last name and their letter grade. So the idea is that instead of putting code in our main function, our task for this demo is to write the function definitions so that this main function will run. So we need to write a function definition for getDataFiles, calcLetterGrade, and processGradeFile. Once we've written these function definitions, then we can run our main function and verify whether we are able to produce the output file shown. So I would encourage you to follow along in our sample code as we complete this example. Let's go ahead and open up CLion and give this a try. All right, so here we are in CLion, and notice we have the exact code that we had in the presentation. We've got our 3 function declarations and our main function. Our task is to add the function definitions so that we can complete this program. Let's go ahead and start with our first function, getDataFiles. So we have the declaration, so we know that our definition must have a similar format. For my own reference while I'm coding this up, I'm going to just copy-paste the function declaration because I know that my definition needs to have the same exact name, return type, and arguments. Then to write my definition, notice I can delete my semicolon and I can put the code inside the curly braces for getDataFiles. So here, the purpose of getDataFiles is I need to prompt my user for the name of my input and output files. This function will use pass by reference to update input file name and output file name with the values that I obtain. So here, I just need to prompt my user for the name of the input file that I want to read. And then notice when I use cin, this value that I read for my cin statement, that's going to be copied into my input variable in my argument. And this value will be stored in input file name. Similarly, I need to ask my user for the name of the output file where I want to write the results. And here, once again, notice I am taking the user's input from the keyboard. I'm storing it in my variable output because this is my reference variable that will be updating output file name in my main function. All right, so next, let's write our function definition for calcLetterGrade. So I'm going to use a similar approach. So I'll delete my semicolon. And notice for my function definition, I use the exact same return type, name, and number of arguments. And I put the code that calcLetterGrade needs to run inside the curly braces. Once again, I'm going to refer to my precondition and postcondition to help me as I write this function definition. I'm told that homework, midterm, and final are all going to hold assignment scores ranging from 0 to 200. And this function needs to return a character corresponding to the letter grade a student receives. So if I receive more than 89.5% of the points, I get an A. Otherwise, I get a B, C, D, or F based on my percentage of points earned. So let's go ahead and perform a calculation in order to help us determine what letter grade we receive. I'm going to declare a double called percentage score, which is my percentage out of the total points possible. In this case, I know that my percentage score will be equal to my homework score. My percentage score will be equal to my homework plus midterm plus final score divided by 600 points possible. And then, of course, I'm just going to multiply this by 100 to get a percentage. So now I know what percentage of the total points I got. Now I need to use some if statements to help me determine which grade I'm going to get. So in this case, I can say, well, if my percentage score is greater than or equal to 89.5, then I get an A grade. And so in order to get an A grade, well, I can just return the character A. Remember, this function should return a character corresponding to the letter grade. So if I get an A, I can just return that A. Then if I'm greater than or equal to 79.5, I get a B grade. And so on. So notice, depending on my percentage score, I get a different result. So my percentage is greater than 69.5, then I get a C. And notice here I'm using else if, and that way the combination of else if with that return statement, this ensures that only one of these if statements is going to be triggering. Finally, if I'm above 59.5, I get a D. And else, if none of those other ones are true, then I return an F. And do a little indentation fix with Control-Alt-L. And you see this function is now complete. So I'm able to determine my percentage score based on a homework, midterm, and final exam given in the argument. And depending on what percentage of the total points I got out of 600, I will return the corresponding letter grade. Our last function is called processGradeFile. And remember, this processGradeFile function is the one that should be processing the input file given to us. Here we have this input file called studenttestscores.txt, and we want to go through this file, read the student name and their 3 scores, and calculate the final letter grade. We then want to produce an output file that has the student's last name and the letter grade, 1 per line, separated by a tab. So our output from processGradeFile should be just a data file containing the student last name and the letter grade, separated by a tab. So let's go ahead and write the code that we need for processGradeFile. So once again, I'm going to take my function declaration and use the same header for my definition, just without that semicolon. And inside the curly braces, I can put all the code that I need for processGradeFile to run. So in order to process my grade file, I'm going to need to declare some other variables. I know I'm going to have the name of an input and output file, but I'm also going to need some variables to hold a student's name and a homework, midterm, and final exam score. So in this case, let's go ahead and declare some variables. So I'll have a variable for the student's last name. I can have some doubles for homework, I've got variables for my homework, midterm, final score. And I can also declare other variables as needed for this program. Notice I also need to actually process the data files, so I'm going to need to make sure I have include filestream and my calcLetterGrade function. So I have declared the include filestream header already. So let's go ahead and declare my input and output file stream objects, and I'm just going to name them inFile and outFile. And I can follow the same procedure that we learned in our file manipulation video. So if you're rusty on data files, you can also check out our file manipulation video for more information. Notice I'm already given the names of my input and output files in my processGradeFile function. So I can directly take these names that I've been given and open them. So I can use the open function to open my input file from my function argument. And I can also open output file from my function argument. So that way I have successfully opened these 2 files so I can read and write data. I can also check to make sure that my file opened properly, so I can use if inFile.fail to check for errors opening the input file. And if I was unable to open my input file, I can go ahead and say error opening the input file. And then I could, for example, I could exit the program with error code 0. So you can use this exit function to immediately end the program since I didn't have a valid file to open. Let's assume that our data files have opened successfully. You'll notice that my test score file has this header. I have name, homework, midterm, final. I don't want to read and process that first line from my file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the first 4 values from my file to get rid of that header. I want to get rid of that header. So I'm just going to declare a dummy variable. And I'm just going to read. Basically here what I'm doing is I'm going to read the first 4 values from the file to this dummy string variable to skip over them. Because I don't care about that header. I just want to analyze the data that comes after. Now I'm ready to actually read the data from my file using a loop. And in this case, I'm going to use a while loop. And notice I can set up my while loop like this. So I can set up a while loop so that as long as I have another row of data to read, so I'm going to read last name, homework score, midterm score, final score, read last name, homework score, midterm score, final score. So I read this whole line of data. And as long as I'm able to read a full line of data from that file, my while loop will continue to run. So as long as I can read these 4 values, that loop will continue. It's also convenient because this while statement will conveniently read the next 4 values and store them in these variables. So once I have read last name, homework score, midterm score, final score, then it's time to calculate the student's letter grade. And I could go through and rewrite all that code, but notice I already have my function calcLetterGrade. So I can use calcLetterGrade and then of course I want to output the letter, the last name, and the student's letter grade to the output file. So in this case, I can just write out file, and then I have last name, that's my student's last name. Have a tab. And then here I want to use calcLetterGrade. And inside calcLetterGrade, I can plug in homework score, midterm score, final score. So notice I don't need to write a ton of extra code here. Since I've already written this calcLetterGrade function, I know that I can directly write my student's last name and then their letter grade just with this one line of code here. And notice this program will repeat for each line of data in my data file. So each student's name will be read their homework midterm final score will be read and plugged into calcLetterGrade to determine their letter grade. And notice I'm writing the last name and letter grade to the data file separated by a tab. And then I have a end line at the end, so each output starts on a new line. So once I'm done reading my data, then all I need to do is close my files, and I'm all finished. Just to help myself debug, I can also put some output statements here. Notice, for example, I can put a statement to inform the user that I'm processing the input data file, and then I can say, when I've closed my files, I can even have a message, data has been written to the output file. Oops, and that would be output file. Data has been written to my output file. So there you have it. Notice rather than writing all this code in my main function, I wrote my code in the function processGradeFile. That way, when I go back to main, and if I want to process some input file, I just call processGradeFile, and that function will be performed. Let's go ahead and run this example and see what happens. So we are prompted, enter the name of the input file we want to read. Here, our input file is named studenttestscores.txt, so let's go ahead and give it that name. And then we're asked name of the output file. Let's call it results. And notice our program has run. We have processed the input file and written to the output file. So if we check results.txt, notice we have the student's last name, a tab, and then their letter grade. So I highly recommend that you go back through this example yourself and verify that you're able to reproduce this result. This is really great practice to get comfortable with functions.